نبدأ هذه الجلسة بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نرحب بكم في الجلسة الثالثة لهذا المؤتمر حول الهجرة القسرية في البلدان العربية، وهذه الجلسة تأتي تحت عنوان فلسطين التهجير القسري في سياق استعماري استيطاني. هنالك ورقتان في هذه الجلسة. الورقة الأولى ستقدمها آيات حمدان، وهي باحثة في المركز العربي للأبحاث ودراسة السياسات، وهي أيضا مرشحة لنيل الدكتوراه في جامعة إكستر في المملكة المتحدة في موضوع التهجير القسري الداخلي في فلسطين. عملت سابقا باحثة زائرة في مركز دراسات اللاجئين في جامعة أكسفورد، وكذلك اشتغلت على مشاريع متعلقة بفلسطين
Palestine, and she has a paper on internal displacement in Palestine, and Ayat also is working currently on a project to study the cases of displacement of Palestinian Syrian families. Ayat, you have 20 minutes. And your paper is entitled Internal Displacement in the Context of Settler Colonialism in Palestine. The paper is divided into three main parts. The first part will deal with colonialism and its relationship to transfer in the Palestinian context. The second one will be dealing with internal displacement in Palestine and the controversy surrounding this term until it was finally settled to be used in 2009. In the third part, this paper will highlight the policies which are aimed at dealing with the question of internal displacement in view of the Israeli policies and the measures taken by the Israeli authorities. I will not spend a lot of time on the first part of the paper because it's all to do with the academic theoretical side. I'll focus on the second and third parts only. I need the PowerPoint.
نمشي للصفحة اللي بعد لو سمحت. أوكي. يقدر مركز رصد النزوح الداخلي
The Center for Internal Displacement, IDMC, estimates in 2019 that there is 30.6 million internally displaced persons in 143 countries around the world. 10.8 million are as a result of conflicts, 17.2 million the result of natural disasters. And we can refer to the statistics published by the IDMC where the center says that 6.9 internally displaced persons are in Africa and the Middle East, as is indicated in the following diagram, which shows that the vast majority of internal displaced persons cases occurred in North Africa and the Middle East and Africa and Western Sahara with 38%. Despite the fact that the Arab area features prominently in this diagram, but there are no policies by the governments in the region to deal with them, except for two countries, Iraq, which implemented this policy in 2008, and Yemen in 2013. Statistics for 2019 show that 10.8 internally displaced people, mostly in Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, and other countries. So far as Palestine is concerned, the Norwegian Council for Refugees considers that the Palestinian case is one of 10 cases in the world. Despite the magnitude of this crisis in the last 70 years, the international attention has in fact gone down rather than up, and the explanation for that in the Palestinian case is the fact that there has not been a just political settlement, and Palestinian refugees should play a prominent part in this, and also the continued silent internal displacement in the West Bank and Gaza, and this kind of ignoring this problem should be understood in conjunction with the Israeli settlement policy and the transfer and elimination. As Patrick Wolf says, this is a pillar of the colonial settlement in Palestine. Azmi Bshara, in his description of the Israeli colonialization of Palestine, is a mixture of classical colonialism and apartheid, which is a colonial type of apartheid system, which can be explained later on, and how the Israelis imposed the system of apartheid. In 1948, as Dr. Bishara says, where the original inhabitants were expelled out of their homeland, and the Palestinians who remained were looked at as a minority, and they were given the Israeli nationality, but on the basis of being non-Jewish minorities. The settlers used two methods in implementing the policies for achieving the transfer they want to achieve. Nur Masalha says that this concept was born almost at the same time with political Zionism itself, and continue to 1967 and afterwards. Also, studies show that since 1948 there were systematic attempts by settler communities and gangs against an original inhabitant, and Ian Pape says that the leaders of Zionism think that there is no possibility of establishing their entity in Palestine so long as the population, the Palestinian population remains, and by October 1948, around 800,000 Palestinians were expelled, which amounted to some 80% of the total Palestinian population. According to UNRWA, Palestinian refugees are those Palestinians who used to live in Palestine and before the 1948 war, and around 800,000 of them were expelled, and the statistics now show that some 5.4 million Palestinian refugees who were originally expelled in 1948, and then the following generations who are not included in this definition. When the first wave of the internal displacement wave has risen a lot of attention, nowadays the internal displacement movement within Palestine do not arise the same amount of interest, and the internally displaced persons who had to leave their houses or their places of residence because they wanted to avoid the impact of armed conflicts, but they have not crossed the internationally recognized borders. And this concept is rather descriptive and non-binding, and unlike the definition given to refugees, it does not give the internally displaced persons a legal definition. And also this concept does not allow for any legal mandate because international law insists on not violating the sovereignty of the national borders of countries, and any international intervention can be given or done if the national governments or countries are not either willing or cannot provide the help needed. And unlike the refugees, there is no recognized UN agency to provide help for the internally displaced persons. There are attempts to deal with these shortcomings in the situation, but according to this and other reasons which were given by UN organizations for not implementing the internally displaced persons inside, and in addition to the fact that UNRWA is there and provides help to the refugees and in a limited manner to the internally displaced, and also most Palestinians have been impacted by the lack of nationality and the policies implemented by the Israeli occupation authorities. There is another problem that we don't have precise details or figures for the internally displaced people. For this reason, when the UN agencies used to refer to internally displaced persons, used to talk about them as homeless people. Until 2006, when a number of NGOs in Palestine, both local and international, to apply pressure on the UN and the international community to recognize these homeless people as being internally displaced persons. So the Interagency Displacement Working Group in 2008 adopted this definition, and in February 2009 the Office of the High Commission for Refugees for the first time requested this concept to be adopted. There are different aspects of the importance for this concept. First, it's unlike the concept of being homeless, the international law provides some basis, and international humanitarian law provide the minimum of standards to provide protection for the internally displaced persons. According to this background information, we can divide them into 3 or maybe 4. The first group of these internally displaced people are the Palestinians who were displaced internally after the establishment of 1948. Those were called the present absentees, who were made to leave their houses between 1948 and 1950. They were called present absentees, or are called so because they left their villages, and although the Israeli nationality law of 1952 recognized them as citizens of Israel, but in fact they were not given anything as a legal status. And also the second group of 1960 after 1960, which is to do with the Israeli policies of confiscating lands and applying the system of apartheid. The Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the Palestinian territories decided that there are 9 causes for the internally displaced people's movements in Palestine. You can see them on the slide. And there are also some organizations who try to provide some approximate estimations or figures, and this is what Badil Center says. There are 350,000 to 360,000 in Galilee and Negev, and also they estimate that there are 238,000 internally displaced people inside Palestine, in the West Bank and Gaza. And there are other estimates. I have no time to go through them. We come to the third part of the paper, which in it I'll be talking about the Israeli policies to force and expel Palestinians, or to get rid of them, and also to avoid their return to their towns and villages. For this reason, there was a number of laws passed. The first was the Law of Return of 1950, which was in response to the resolution, Security Council Resolution number 194, which stipulated the return of Palestinian refugees. And this law, the Israeli law of 1950, gives any Jewish person who decides to come to Israel the right of citizenship immediately. The other law is the law which pertains to the properties of the absent present people, which allowed Israel to benefit from the properties of these Palestinian people. and also the Nationality Act of 1952, which pertains to non-Jewish persons, and which stipulated that these people should be physically present within the 1948 truce lines, therefore excluding a large number of them, and also the 1954 year and its amendment in 2017, which really is an attempt to not allow Palestinian refugees to come to return to villages, and the Israelis captured those who tried to infiltrate and smuggle themselves back into their villages and towns, and arrested and deported them. There are other transfer and ethnic cleansing policies in the 1967 areas, which are manifested in Jerusalem specifically, like abolishing the right of permanent residency on the grounds of they violate the oath of allegiance or something. And also the Israeli authorities uses urban planning as a pretext to expel Palestinians and expand Jewish settlements, and also as a result of the Oslo Agreement, which divided Palestinian territories into A, B, and C, and H2, H1, and H3 in Hebron. And also after the establishment of the wall, this has added another dimension, and especially in the so-called seam zones. So the Palestinians who were living in areas adjacent to the wall have become under the threat of expulsion unless they get the authorization by Israeli authorities to allow them to go back to their homes. And also the policies through a system of checkpoints to deprive the Palestinians from the right of reaching their own areas. The last part of the paper I will leave till discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No matter how accurate and elaborate the description, it still falls short of depicting the exact reality of a lot of Palestinians in Palestine. The reality is even much more painful. So from paper 1, we move to paper 2 now, that will be presented by Kholoud Al Ajarma and Ihab Maharmeh. So we start with Kholoud, knowing that Ihab will take the floor first, then followed by Kholoud. Kholoud is a researcher and university professor of anthropology in Groningen University of Holland. She has an MA in peace talks, international peace talks from the UK, and has an MA in anthropological and development studies from Bergen in Norway. She has taught anthropology in Holland for Muslim communities, and she is a visiting professor in Oxford Islamic Studies Center. This is not her first visit to our Arab Center in Doha Institute, and last year she has been a member of the Arab PhD Students Conference. And I was honored to run that workshop. This is a conspiracy by Haidar to have me moderate the session. I just knew from Kholoud that also Ayat and Kholoud have presented their PhD thesis, and they're waiting for the final response, and they are about to become doctors, PhD holders, that is. Welcome once again, Kholoud. Ihab is well known by a lot in the institute and in the center. He is an Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. He's a researcher here. He worked in Birzeit University, where he got his MA in International Studies from Brahim Abu Lughod Institute, also an MA in General Policies from the Doha Institute. He has many studies on general policies or public policies. He has contributed to a lot of conferences on governance, furthering dialogue, integration, climate change, and colonialism. Go ahead, Ihab. Both of you. You will speak about the Israeli colonialism, forced displacement, and Area C, and the Jordan Valley. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, everyone.
هذه الورقة هي عبارة عن دراسة حالة.
This paper is the case study for the forced displacement in Area C and the Jordan Valley. It gives an analytical overview of the policies used by Israel to forcefully displace Palestinians from their lands. We can see the facts and implications of these policies by seeing a lot of Palestinians having to flee their homes. We have a number of conclusions made after the research that we've worked on, Kholoud and I. We've accurately focused on the forced displacement policy in the said areas for many reasons. The first reason is that Area C has a number of colonialist practices, military practices. There's a lot of training camps for the Israeli forces, around 70 Israeli military bases specifically. The second part, it's considered to be as the main source of Israeli agriculture, and the returns are around $700 million a year in 2013, as per the Settlement Council. We see them in red, the agricultural areas. It's considered also to be a very important industrial area for Israel, including the main industrial areas to fuel the treasury of Israel. The important industrial areas are in red. Most importantly, Mishoro Idomim settlement. It is in Mali Adomim, close to the Khan Ahmar. The fourth point is that in this area there's a lot of touristic resorts. The Israelization of the Palestinian areas is happening in this area. This is a promo or an ad to a Palestinian area presented by Israel as an Israeli area. So this is part of the reason why we chose this one. It also forms 60% of the total area of the West Bank. The one that is in orange, dark orange, is the area, is Area C, that is part of our study. The one in yellow are known as areas A and B. In 2012, the OCHA issued a report stating that this area is one of the most exposed to the Israeli constraints since the Second Palestinian Intifada. and they got the natural resources exclusively for the settlers. The third reason why it was chosen was that Israel considers it important for demolition. Since 1988, Israel issued more than 16,000 demolition orders against Palestinians. Demolition operations have raised from 2 in 1988 to 700 demolition orders in 2016. Also, Israel conducted more than 47% of the demolition operations in 2019 in Area C, in comparison with 25% in Jerusalem and 1% in Area A. Besides the fact that they represent a 10% increase from the demolition orders deducted in 2017 and 18. Now, for the main reason for conducting this study is that we have wanted to identify the mechanisms used by the Israeli settlers in Area C and to look into how Israeli settlers use these tools in order to forcefully displace the Palestinians to get rid of them and remove them. Also, they announce it as a closed area, which means it's closed before Palestinians, and Palestinians are forbidden from living or working or constructing or buying property there. Also, analyzing the settlement policy in Area C reveals, on the one hand, that it relies on a legacy, consecrated legacy from the colonialist practices to expel Palestinians and replace them with settlers. And on the other hand, and creating frustrating living conditions for Palestinians in order to expel them. This is their ultimate objective. On the first point, this study showed that the forced displacement of Palestinians remains to a certain extent, particular in comparison with other cases of forced displacement. Palestinians first is excluded from the International Conventions on the Refugees. The 1951 Convention and additional protocol issued by the United Nations excluded Palestinian refugees from this convention. And it focused on the fact that it doesn't apply to the people who currently enjoy the assistance of UN agencies. This exception made the international community rely on the UNRWA definition of refugee, because the UNRWA considered that the Palestinians should be part of what is of the so-called the UNRWA. The UNRWA defines Palestinian refugees as the people that used to live in Palestine between 1948, June and May 1948, and who have lost their houses and source of income due to the 1948 war. Despite expanding this definition to include their children and grandchildren, this definition remained narrow in terms of the lack of legal protection to the Palestinian refugees present in Palestine. Also, the forced displacement didn't only end at the forced displaced Palestinians of 1948. As Ayat has mentioned, there's no dealing with the forced displacement after 48. The settlers didn't stop at this, controlling the lands or expelling the Palestinians. They followed a systematic policy against Palestinians in order to displace them after 48. The first proof is the emergency law that was issued in the very first days when Israel was established. knowing that they used the justification of protecting Israel's security, but the real reason was preventing the return of refugees that were displaced. This systematic Israeli policy continued even after the 1967 war, and Israel linked the sustainability and the continuity of this forced displacement with a de facto policy, the fact-creating policy. This is expressed in a continuous and institutional way to put an end to the presence of the original population. So the forced displacement remains in its core a systematic and forced practice to expel Palestinians from their homes to other places, especially when this ideology confirms the control of a certain group of another group. The hegemony of the settlement and colonialist policy is premised on exclusion without abuse. So this aims at expelling the original population outside. This is what Mani explained, specifically Faiz Sayeh, when he said that the Zionist occupation of Palestine is intrinsically contrary to the presence of the original population, and we've seen that with Fawaz Trabulsi when he said that this colonialism aims at creating a Jewish majority and requires taking away the property of the original population and expelling them from their own lands. Ayat has mentioned a lot of points that I will not elaborate on. And I will talk about Jeffrey Anson when he spoke about the de facto or the fact-creating policy, when he said that the state of Israel, as understood by its founders, is premised on a simple idea. The state considered to be the basis. The other part has to do with creating a constantly frustrating environment that forces them to be displaced. We're talking about Palestinians specifically. It showed that even though there's a drop in the numbers of Palestinians in ARC and the Jordan Valley, which is clear on the ground, however, there's a contradiction and there's a lack of data due to a number of factors. Maybe amongst them the different definitions of the research area, the lack of monitoring and documenting tools, and the constant movement of Palestinians and their displacement. The biggest drop of Palestinians in Area C happened around the 1967 war. The total number of Palestinians was about 325,000. And after the war, it would drop to 10,000. Today, the number of Palestinians in this area is less than 315,000 Palestinians, around 300 housing areas. This demographic return happened despite all the obstacles and the colonialist constraints. However, in view of the importance and the sensitivity of this area, the number of population could have been double what it is today, especially that the population growth in the West Bank specifically, as per the Palestinian Statistics Office, is 4% since 1967 and 16% in the research area. So the number of Palestinians should have been at least twice what it is. So for social and economic considerations related to the population of the area. This is on one hand. On the other hand, this colonialist policy guaranteed the increase of the number of settlers from 0 in 1967 to around 700 settlement or settler households in the 80s, and then spiked up to even for more than the Palestinians. We're talking about 325,000 Israeli settlers with by mid-2019. I now give the floor to Ms. Kholoud to elaborate on the mechanisms or the typologies used by Israel to cause the displacement of Palestinians.
Thank you, Ihab. When we conducted this study, we have reached the conclusion that Area C has been designated according to Israeli way of classification to what is military and what is civilian. They used it to build military camps and settlements and protectorate areas like natural reservations and areas with mines and minefields. These are by and large called closed areas, in other words, closed for Palestinians. These areas are also used as training grounds for the Israeli army, although they are inhabited by Palestinians, so therefore they use military orders to evacuate the Palestinians of their homes and houses. Now you will see one of these orders distributed by the Israeli military in the village of Kharbat Hamsa, which its inhabitants are forced to be displaced, and the timetable shows that Sundays and Mondays and Wednesdays and the dates and the timing of the 100 and so inhabitants of the village to leave their homes for 3 days and 2 nights every week. This was during the month of Ramadan, when people are fasting and the weather tends to be hot in those days, so it's especially harsh for women and children. The inhabitants of this village said that they take their cattle and children to the mountains nearby. So this can be described as temporary displacement, and they're not allowed to return until another military order is issued. And the timings, although they are announced beforehand, but they can change from day to day. For example, on the morning on Wednesday in June, on the first day of the Eid al-Fitr, the festival, the Israeli armed forces appeared on the scene 2 hours earlier than the time announced and forced people to leave their homes. And in addition to the discomfort, the Palestinian villagers are faced with another risk, and that is being exposed to unexploded munitions, mines, etc. In the last 4 years, 3 children were killed and a large number were injured, and there was a lot of loss in the livestock of the village. So this temporary displacement orders forces the inhabitants to stay away from their belongings and properties, and also if they do not obey these orders, they are also subjecting themselves to financial fines or permanent displacement from the area. These are the warnings issued by the Israeli military to some inhabitants who did not obey the order, and says, "We warn you that in case you do not respond, we can deport you from the area, the closed area. We can confiscate your livestock and make you pay for the costs too. The villagers complain of constant harassment and also whenever they entered to these closed areas, which are the property of the villagers themselves. The second method adopted by the Israeli properties, they tend to describe or designate certain areas as live firing ranges, and we see in the Al-Farisiya and Al-Malih villages near the Tobaz province, these concrete blocks are placed only few yards away from the houses of Palestinians to scare and intimidate the villagers, and Israel uses this kind of signs to confiscate the Palestinian lands and make the Palestinians leave their areas. Another form of harassment is the minefields, which are there alongside the border area between Palestine and Jordan. This photograph is taken from the village of Sakut, which was destroyed by the Israelis in the 1967 war, and the villagers until today are trying to return to but although this area is designated as a closed area for Palestinians, some areas were opened for the Israelis to use them to build settlements. You have 1 minute left. Here you can see how the settlements are distributed in the Area C, and like what Ihab has said, more than 300,000 Israeli settlers live here, and the Israeli occupation authorities call them civilian areas because civilians live here. This is one of the settlements, which is not more than one house, and the entire property is surrounded with Israeli army units to protect them, and the adjacent areas where Palestinians live are banned not to come close to the house within 10 kilometers or something. This is another such housing unit. We have to stop there because time is over. We thank Ihab and Kholoud. We have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. Before I give the floor to you to pose your questions, I just want to say that I'll take 3 questions and then we respond to them until we finish the 15 minutes. And this is maybe an observation, not a question. I felt that Ayat and you, the paper is like a report being presented to the Human Rights Commission or something. I was waiting for something more academic, maybe an expansion of a concept of this started with Ayat's paper and increased with Kholoud and Ihab. I just wanted to make myself understood. Now I open the floor for your questions and answers, and if you want to respond to what I say, then by all means do so. I'll take 3 questions first, and then we take a second round. Assalamu alaikum. I would like to thank the speakers for their papers. For the Palestinian situation, I want to go to Ayat's presentation. She spoke about she spoke about forced displacement in North Africa, and then she mentioned the Southern Sahara. I wasn't quite sure of what she meant by that. I'm from Algeria. The Geneva Convention of 1925 is the cornerstone for protecting refugees, and in its first article it gives a definition of refugees. It excludes the Palestinian refugees. I would like someone to explain this to me, and what is the background of this? Why the Palestinian refugees have been excluded from the international protection system? Thank you very much for both presentations. I am Palestinian, so I know what you're talking about. I agree with Nabil that I was hoping that to be more of an academic paper with questions being posed and answers being given. Secondly, so far as the figures are concerned, Ihab, you said that it's true. There is about 5.5 million people registered with UNRWA, and everybody knows that this figure, I think it maybe Ayat said that, I don't know. This figure, this register has numbers, people who are dead, and so there is a lot of inflation in the figures. Sometimes these figures make us feel, for example, when the rate of increase in the population and the rate of births is 16% or something. I think this is rather exaggerated. In any event, so far as the second point is concerned, which pertains to UNRWA, I think you portrayed it as the opposite. The UN learned from the UNRWA experience. In fact, it was an agency was established specifically for the Palestinian refugees, and other refugees have other agencies. So this should be a positive aspect, not a negative one. You seem to think that it's the other way around. I think it's the opposite. I think UNRWA was established and the UN has learned this from this mistake to treat Palestinian refugees differently than others. Now there are attempts to abolish UNRWA completely. Can you please explain this? I may be wrong after all. We start with Ayat. if you want to respond to the... Yes, I will start with a question. This was a response to the call for papers for this workshop, which deals with the theoretical aspects, and this is part of the PhD dissertation I'm working on, which is based on in-personal interviews with displaced people in the fire zone area. And I relied on in-depth interviews about the policies to expel the Palestinians and how the Palestinians responded by finding ways and means to resist. There was no time to mention that because of the specific nature of this workshop. Yes, this paper is more technical and more descriptive. If I had time, I would have mentioned other things so far as the analytical part is concerned. As for Africa, I'm not an expert on African affairs. The paper exclusively deals with the Palestinian thing, but I wanted to link it to the trend, international trend to displace people, sub-Saharan Africa. This the Western Sahara, which is what you mentioned North Africa as a region. There is no such thing as Western Sahara. We call it Sub-Saharan Africa. The other question on the figures I used in this paper, they are from the Palestinian official figures, and they rely on UNRWA's figures. There is a problem that the UNRWA is decided from June 1946 to May 1948. Any displacement before or after did not carry the designation of refugee, and there are estimates given by the Badil Center, which speaks of 1 million refugees who come under this categorization, which in countries where the UNRWA has no mandate or presence. So therefore, this million is outside the scope of UNRWA's mandate, and they are the refugees before 46 and after 48. Okay, we can't hear the gentleman without a microphone. I have two questions. The first is the study attempted to study how the Israelis are expelling Palestinians from their lands, and this is the dilemma which is mentioned in international studies. They only use figures and facts about what happens, but does not allude to the methods employed by the Israelis to achieve this kind of expulsion. So therefore the Palestinians deal with these things as part and parcel of their daily lives. So therefore this study tries to reveal the mechanisms employed by the Israelis to expel Palestinians from their land. And this is also exclusive to Area C because of the specific nature of Area C. In the other areas, Jerusalem and others, and in areas near the wall, there are different methods used. As for the Area C methods, they have not been well known. That's why we focused on them in this paper. So far as the UNRWA is concerned, it was the Palestinians were excluded from the Geneva Convention, and with the additional protocol, the Palestinians have been excluded, and the Palestinian refugees were only were referred to according to UNRWA's definition. The UNRWA, in fact, only deals with the refugees from the point of view of providing help so far as health and educational services are concerned, and not provide the Palestinians with the protection and protecting them from forced displacement. The study also did not stop there, but also dealt with the methods employed by the Israelis aimed at expelling the Palestinians. As for the percentage of growth in Palestinian population, this is from the Palestinian Population Center, which indicates clearly that from 1997, the first report, until now, and the Badil Center says in a report that percentage of growth in the population of Palestine until 2009 was 6.5% of the Palestinian population. This is the annual rate. Yeah. Thank you to all our speakers. Because the Arab-Israeli conflict is open to different aspects, so far as the legal aspect of this conflict is concerned, and also the Geneva Convention, according to which the High Commission for Refugees was established, this is very important from a legal point of view. The UNRWA was started before the High Commission, I think in 1948. The High Commission for the Refugees was established in 1951. Comparison here is very important because the UNRWA's mandate means providing help and protection. Comparing it to the 1951 convention and this additional protocol emphasizes that the role of the High Commission for Refugees is to provide help, protection, and seeking permanent solutions, but the permanent solutions were dropped when UNRWA was established. UNRWA is a temporary organization, the mandate for which is renewed, I think, on annual basis. So, therefore, what Israel fears most is the legal aspects, especially when it comes to the International Criminal Court, when they thought they were faced with the universal jurisdiction aspect of it. We will close the session now. We thank all three speakers and and we see you in the next session.